guys, today I'd like to focus on A Christmas Carol, and in particular the theme of change and redemption. And there's our hero, perhaps, looking slightly miserly, so clearly a depiction from the opening staves of the novella. Right, okay, as with all the little video lessons on theme, I'll offer a definition for the theme in question. In this case, it's redemption. So, dictionary definition for redemption: the act of saving or being saved from sin, error, or evil. It's pretty clear that there's one character in particular that this is pertinent for, relevant to. So, the theme of redemption centres around the main character of Scrooge and his transformation from miserly to generous, from lonely to isolated to popular, and from miserable to happy. You should also incorporate Marley's ghost and how redemption is too late for him, plus the role the three spirits have in Scrooge's overall redemption. Consider also the wider societal implications in relation to this theme. Think of the children, want and ignorance, and what may become of these now that Scrooge, and perhaps, as Dickens intended, wider society have changed their ways. Okay, so when tackling or exploring the theme of redemption, these are the kind of areas that you should consider. Which characters does the theme relate to? Well, as I've just stipulated, Scrooge, Marley's ghost. I'll focus on some key quotations. Remember, 2 or 3 quotations from the wider novella should satisfy the examiner's thirst for evidence. Remember, roughly 20% of the marks go on context, so Dickens' view of harsh society, we'll have a look at that. Setting, Victorian society, how does that form Dickens' views? What issues does it throw up? And we'll see how that's tackled under this theme. And the incidents with the three spirits and how they push Scrooge towards this change, towards his redemption. Okay, so again, there's a bit of text here, so pause the video, jot down anything that strikes you as being interesting that you think you could use in your exam answer or an assessment that you've got coming up. Okay, so the powerful underlying message in the novella is that everyone can change. If Scrooge can change, then there's no excuse for any of us. That's the pretty much Dickens' message. I think I'm just going to repeat myself here. Dickens challenges the reader that if a character like Scrooge, extreme in his rejection of anything that doesn't make him money, can become a joyous, generous individual, then it's possible for us to also change our own attitudes. Granted, we may not be as miserable and mean-spirited as Scrooge, but it doesn't mean that we can't improve how we behave in any way. There are a number of factors behind Scrooge's transformation, but include the reminder that he once was happy and enjoyed Christmas and the friendship and love of others. That's the ghost of Christmas past. He's upset at the thought that Tiny Tim might die. It implies compassion in him. The ghost of Christmas present using his own cruel words against him when observing the abject poverty so many poor people had to endure. What did Scrooge say? He said, well, if they died, it helped solve the problem. Or there's plenty of prisons available for the poor, so not really Scrooge's problem. Remember that the implication there is that from Scrooge and society that being poor is a crime. Being poor was considered the result of being idle or lazy, but we'll see how that isn't the case. I'm sure you know that anyway from your own studying of the story so far. The realization that nobody would mourn his death, and also the awareness of what he's missing out on in terms of family celebrations, all these are relevant to Scrooge's redemption. But the bottom line is that it is Scrooge himself that allows redemption to take place, as he learns the value of empathy, family and kindness. The spirits merely guide him. They don't force him to change, but it is his willingness to embrace change and learn some harsh lessons that brings about his own redemption. That's important to acknowledge, okay? He could have responded in a different way to Marley's ghost and the three spirits, but he didn't. He chose, he understood, he acknowledged that actually he was unhappy and he was being cruel mean-spirited to Bob and to anybody else, any requests for charity and so on. And he knew that wasn't right. Okay, bit of a background to the story, context and setting. Okay, so the 19th century witnessed the Industrial Revolution, accelerated by the development of using coal to power the steam engine. As a result of this, there was a huge migration of workers from the countryside to the towns and cities as a result of the new work on offer in the factories. This created, on the one hand, vast wealth for the propertied individuals and controllers of business, but meant that millions earned very little and were exploited because there were far more people looking for fewer jobs. Cities couldn't cope with the growth explosion, resulting in widespread cramped living conditions, poverty and illness. One shocking statistic for this time was that child mortality rates were dreadfully high, with 1 in 5 children dying before they reached the age of 5. I mean, that's shocking. 20% of children died before they reached the age of 5. Dickens' own background, which saw his father thrown into prison for debt, and his subsequent work as a court reporter, allowed him to see how harshly treated the poor were and what awful living conditions they had to endure. Gave him an insight into how unfairly treated the poor were. Dickens uses the Cratchits to represent poor people, but ironically it's their influence over Scrooge, who represents those with power and influence. He was a money counter, or what we'd call an accountant now, so he controlled a lot of money, that allows him to see the harsh realities of Victorian London for the majority of people, and ultimately leads to his transformation. Okay, so as I do typically, you're going to need some quotations to reinforce your points. So I'm going to track Scrooge's redemption, seen through quotations. So Scrooge at the beginning, he was obviously miserable and miserly. Bit of alliteration there. He was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. This is our first real description of Scrooge, and it presents him in an unpleasant light as a mean and harsh employer. He was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, hard and sharp as flint. The description continues with this simile implying his ability to hurt others. He doesn't sound very warm or welcoming or open. Solitary as an oyster. Again, look at the language technique. Simile, sibilance. Sibilance is the repeated S or SH sounds. Makes him sound sinister. Solitary as an oyster, highlighting his isolation. Bah, humbug. We associate very commonly with Scrooge. His gruff, means kind of blunt, dismissive response to his nephew, and indeed anyone wishing him happy Christmas. It all points to a joyless, miserable individual. And these are the words that Ghost of Christmas Present threw back at him that I was alluding to earlier. Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? This is justification for his lack of charity when asked. He said he pays his taxes, he does his bit. He doesn't need to do any more. Let the government, let society provide for them. It shouldn't come down to the individual. And then the more brutal part of his words. If they would rather die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Now, this links back to Tiny Tim, because these are words that Scrooge utters, but the reality is that they're uttered about people like Tiny Tim and the Cratchits, and this really hits him hard when he realises this. Perhaps his harshest response to being told of the plight of the city's poor, a comment which comes back to literally haunt him. There's a bit of a joke there because the spirits haunt him. Okay, never mind. It's not my business. That sums up his attitude. Society's problems are of no concern to him. Right. The change, the redemption continued now. Okay, so we've seen how he's been introduced to us at the start. So, how does he go from miserly and miserable to generous and joyful? Impossible, I hear you say. I will honour Christmas in my heart. I will live in the past, the present and the future. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. This reflects the transformation in his character and how he's learned his lessons from the three ghosts. It's been pointed out to him how he was in love once. He was part of a family once. He was also lonely and neglected as part of a family. He remembered how that felt. He didn't like it. And it makes him think. I am light as a feather. I am as happy as an angel. I am as merry as a schoolboy. I am giddy as a drunken man. The change in his mood is evident as he's rid himself of all his selfish negativity. And who knew To rid yourself of all your negativity would make you feel better. And look at him. Do you think, I wonder if he could have had this experience decades earlier, I'm sure he would have embraced it then. But at least he's embracing it now. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. Now, babies don't know. They've got a lot to learn. So this implies or reflects his willingness to learn how to be a decent human being. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit. The first thing he does, the start of his promise to help the Cratchits and treat his office clerk with respect and kindness. He's talking about the biggest turkey that he can find, and send it to the Cratchits so they can have a wonderful Christmas meal. Not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in it. So this is his donation to charity, which isn't just what the men asked for. It's far in excess of what they asked for. This is Scrooge. Scrooge, a name we associate with being mean with money. Now he's like giving far more than he's been asked to give, reflecting his guilt and awareness and acknowledgement that the way he's led his life up until now has been wanting, poor. And he's looking to make amends. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred? Remember, family was important to him growing up. His sister was the most important to him. And now he wants to reconnect with his sister's son, Fred, his nephew, who has always held the olive branch open to him, but Scrooge has battered it back, dismissed it, being quite brutal in his responses. And of course, Fred does welcome him in. And they're happy families once again. And to Bob Cratchit, therefore, I'm about to raise your salary. Evidence of just how much he's changed, no more the miserly boss. And then the narrator, Scrooge was better than his words. He did it all and became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew. Evidence that this change was a permanent one. And he became renowned for his generosity, as much as he'd been renowned for his miserliness prior to that. Okay, and the final screen, some useful quotes, not the final screen yet, getting ahead of myself. To link to the theme redemption, a chain I forged in life. Now, this is Marley's ghost explaining what fate awaits Scrooge if he doesn't mend his ways. So Marley is telling Scrooge that he is now paying the penalty for the way he led his life. He focused, like Scrooge, just on money and himself. And as a consequence, he has to spend his eternity in purgatory, that middle ground between earth and heaven. And it's torture for him. And he spends his life carrying this heavy chain around. And he sees where all the help is needed, and he goes and he tries to help, but he can't because it's too late. He can't effect change anymore because he's dead. This is his spirit. So he warns Scrooge, don't end up like me. Don't. Change it's not too late for you. You change and then you don't get this penalty, this punishment. And that's a big impact on Scrooge. If the shadows remain unaltered, the boy will die. Ghost of Christmas Present, reinforcing the harsh reality that unless society as a whole changes, the most vulnerable, like the children, will suffer the most. Remember the statistic, 1 in 5 children die before they reach the age of 5 in Victorian England. If the shadows remain unaltered, the boy will die. So if you don't change your ways, Tiny Tim will die. And the likes of him will die. Remember, the Cratchits represent the poor. So Tiny Tim represents the most vulnerable of the poor. Has a big impact on Scrooge. And then we've got the boy is ignorance, the girl is want. Beware them both and all their degree. But most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased. Doom with a capital D. So society's on a downward spiral. It'll end in disaster, misery for everyone. Dickens is using these two children to represent the poor in society and how they are miserable and wretched. Two emotive adjectives to describe them, rather than happy and joyful as children should be. Miserable and wretched to describe young children doesn't sit right. Dickens lays the responsibility for this at the hands of the politicians and the wealthy, and that change must happen to remedy these ills. Okay, So connecting the theme of redemption to another exam question, well, any question you get on characters of Scrooge, Marley's Ghost, Three Spirits, they all feed into the theme of redemption. Use of setting, we talked about Victorian England just now. The creation of tension and or mystery, well, it's a horror story, it's got gothic imagery. How does this feed into redemption? And then what's Dickens' intention with the whole theme of redemption? Remember, his message, the bottom line, if somebody like Scrooge can change, anybody can change. And more to the point, we must change, because it is not right there are so many millions of people living in destitution, in poverty, in illness. It's not right when there is so much wealth amongst so few. Echoes today, in fact, as well, but I won't get too political now. Okay, that's A Christmas Carol and redemption. That's enough to secure you a high grade. And it depends on what you're aiming for. 9, 8, 7. It's all there. And yeah, best of luck, guys, and tune back again for another video.